If you think you've seen betrayal, I promise you, you've never heard anything like this. Imagine finding out, after over 40 years of marriage, that the love of your life was cheating on you with the one person you believed was your mirror in this world, your twin sister. Yes, her. The same woman who held my hand when our mother passed away, the one who always said she loved me as if we were one. I almost lost my mind. But today, at 75 years old, I'm still standing. Because I survived. And I want to tell you everything. My name is Margaret Elaine Collins. I'm 75 years old, born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. I've watched the world change more times than I can count. I saw color TV arrive, watched man walk on the moon, and lived long enough to see the internet swallow the quiet of our countryside. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I went through after turning 60. For many years, my life looked like something out of a wholesome magazine story. I married Franklin D. Collins when I was 23, in a simple ceremony in my daddy's backyard. The grass smelled like summer, fireflies lit up the evening sky, and the dress my mama sewed by hand looked like something from a bridal catalog. I felt like the most loved woman on earth. Frank was charming, the kind of man who opened car doors, pulled out chairs at restaurants, and said, "I love you," with his eyes, even when he didn't speak a word. He sold farm equipment and traveled a lot, mostly across the South, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. And me? Well, I was the good country wife. I took care of the house, our 2 children, Patrick and Sarah, and also my twin sister, Marilyn, who had been living with us ever since she lost her husband in a car accident back in the 90s. Yes, we all lived together. She was family. And in my naivete, she was a part of me. Since we were girls, we had never been apart. We wore matching clothes, played switcheroo to confuse our classmates, shared school secrets, and even dreams. I always knew Marilyn had a beauty that turned heads. She was bolder, more outspoken, while I was quieter, more observant. But I never, not even once, thought she could do what she did. Now looking back, I see signs I never noticed. The hushed giggles when I walked into a room, the way she'd skip outings on weekends because she was tired, the look in his eyes when she laughed at something silly. At the time, I just thought it was sweet, that they got along like real family should. I thought I was lucky to have a husband who treated my sister like one of us, to have a sister who felt safe under my roof. But I remember one day, clearer than most. It was a crisp autumn Sunday. Orange leaves blanketed our front porch, and I was in the kitchen baking apple pie. Frank had just returned from a trip to Savannah. Marilyn was chopping vegetables by the sink. She wore a dark blue dress with pearl buttons, mine actually. When Frank walked in and saw her, he paused, just for a second. Then he smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile you give your sister-in-law. It was something else. A smile full of memories I wasn't part of. But me, fool that I was, I just thought he was happy to be home. That night, the 2 of them stayed up talking, late. I went to bed early with a headache. I heard them laughing softly downstairs. I thought about going down but told myself I was being paranoid. They're close. That's a good thing, I whispered to myself, turning over in bed. What I didn't know was that very weekend, the 2 of them had returned from a hotel in Atlanta, while I was home folding sheets, baking for the grandkids, and watering the geraniums. They were sharing a bed that didn't belong to me. That memory has a smell now. The scent of cinnamon apples and chamomile tea. The crunch of dried leaves under my feet. The sound of the kettle whistling, her laughter, his truck pulling into the gravel driveway. It has a taste, too. The bitter taste of shattered innocence. People say the worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the shame. The shame of not seeing it coming, of opening your home, your life, your heart, and being fooled. And let me tell you, I understand that shame more than anyone. But what you need to know is this: I survived. And this story doesn't end in sadness. If this grandma's story is touching your heart, go ahead and leave a like. It really helps the channel and shows that you want to hear more real stories like this one. Subscribe right here to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next ones coming soon. And if you know someone who might need to hear something like this, share it. Sometimes a simple story can change an entire day. Thank you for being here and for listening with your heart. It's hard to explain what it feels like when your world begins to crack, but everything still looks normal on the surface. Like you're walking through a house that's already on fire, but the flames are invisible. That was my life for nearly a decade, full of smiles that hid lies, of Sunday dinners soaked in deception. One morning, I remember waking up to the smell of coffee drifting into the bedroom. I could hear Marilyn humming in the kitchen. She always hummed gospel songs when she was in a good mood. Frank was already up and had taken the truck into town for some repairs, or so he said. I walked down the stairs with my robe tied tight, and Marilyn turned and smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. "You want some eggs, Margie?" she asked, pouring orange juice into 2 glasses. "Sure," I said. "Is Frank already gone?" "Left before sunrise," she said, like it was nothing. Her eyes didn't flinch. Her hands didn't tremble. And yet, there was something off in her voice, something rehearsed, and for the first time, I felt a small crack in the glass of my trust. I started paying attention to the little things. I noticed how often she'd wash her perfume off before he came home. I noticed how he suddenly started locking his phone. I noticed that he didn't kiss me on the cheek anymore when he walked in. He used to, always, even when we were tired or angry. But not anymore. One evening, our daughter Sarah came by with the grandkids, and Marilyn sat a little too close to Frank on the porch swing. I watched, pretending to shell peas, while she laughed at something he whispered. He was wearing that same navy flannel shirt he used to wear on our dates. The shirt I bought him one Christmas long ago. And she reached out, casually, and brushed a leaf off his shoulder like she had the right. Sarah noticed. She didn't say anything right then. But later that night, when we were cleaning up the dishes, she looked at me and said quietly, "Mama, is Aunt Marilyn all right?" "Why do you ask?" I said, almost choking on the question. I don't know. She's been acting different around Daddy." I waved it off. I couldn't handle the idea. Not yet. Not from my own daughter's mouth. But that seed was already planted. And once a seed of doubt gets into your soil, it grows fast. And it's ugly. The moment everything truly changed came on a Thursday afternoon. I'd gone into town to pick up a prescription. And when I came back, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Frank was supposed to be at work. Marilyn had said she was going to the library. But as I stepped inside, I heard the faint sound of laughter upstairs. The bedroom door creaked shut. My heart stopped. I walked upstairs, slow. Each step felt like it might break beneath me. I reached the top, stood outside the door to the guest room, Marilyn's room. And I swear to you I could hear him, his voice, her laugh. And my world shattered. I didn't open the door. I didn't scream. I turned and walked back down, drove my car to the lake, and cried for what felt like hours. It wasn't denial anymore. It was truth. Cold, sharp, and cruel. That night, I sat across from them at the dinner table and said nothing. They acted like nothing had happened. Frank passed me the potatoes. Marilyn complimented the roast. But I saw them differently now. I wasn't blind anymore, and I wasn't going to be silent for much longer. Funny how betrayal doesn't come all at once. It trickles in like a leaky faucet, drop by drop, until one day it floods the whole house. And when it does, you either drown in it, or you learn to swim. And I was done drowning. It's strange, isn't it? How a woman can live most of her life for others, and then suddenly wake up to find herself a stranger in her own story. That's what happened to me. After that Thursday afternoon, I didn't feel like Margaret Collins anymore. I was someone else, someone hollow, quiet, watching, waiting. I didn't say anything right away. You'd think I would have stormed in, confronted them, thrown their clothes out on the lawn like in one of those dramatic soap operas. But that's not who I was. And at 75, I wasn't going to become that overnight. Instead, I did something much harder. I stayed silent, and I watched. I started writing things down in a little blue notebook I kept hidden in the laundry room behind the fabric softener. Dates, times, things said, glances exchanged. The way Marilyn would conveniently take a walk the same days Frank got home early. The way he smiled when her phone lit up at the dinner table, like they had their own language, a private world I'd never been invited into. Every Sunday we still went to church. We sat in the second pew, like always, Marilyn on one side of Frank, me on the other. Pastor Wallace would preach about forgiveness, about the strength of family and the sanctity of marriage, and I'd sit there with my hands folded, wondering how many other women in that sanctuary were quietly breaking like me. I found myself staring at the stained glass window above the altar. It showed a shepherd holding a lamb, surrounded by wolves in the shadows. I wondered if the artist meant for that to be literal, or if he knew the real wolves wore lipstick and your husband's cologne. Then came the evening that pushed everything too far. Frank and I had been invited to a retirement dinner for one of his old colleagues, a man named Gerald. Marilyn wasn't supposed to go. It was a couple's event. But somehow she ended up with an invitation too. Frank insisted it would be rude to exclude her. "She's been lonely lately," he said, not looking me in the eyes. "Lonely," I repeated, my voice low. "Funny. She seems pretty fulfilled." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Nothing. Just observation," I answered, and turned away before he could see the storm building behind my calm. That night, she wore a silver dress I hadn't seen before. Her hair was up in a bun, the kind I used to wear when Frank and I first started dating. And her perfume, it was the same one I wore on our wedding night. Chanel No. 5. A gift from Frank, all those years ago. At the dinner, they sat too close, laughed too loudly, and when the waitress brought the check, Marilyn reached for Frank's wallet before he did. My hand froze on the table. Every part of me wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled. A calm came over me, the kind that only shows up after enough heartbreak to stop the bleeding. It was the kind of peace that comes when you know your next move, when you finally accept that the love you've been holding on to isn't real anymore. Or maybe never was. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and drove to the only person I knew would tell me the truth. Our son, Patrick. He lives about 40 minutes out, in a quiet town called Waynesville, in a small brick house with 2 big golden retrievers and a garden he's far too proud of. When he opened the door and saw me standing there with red eyes and no words, he just hugged me. "Mama," he whispered, "what happened?" And right there, on his back porch, under a sky just starting to turn gold with sunrise, I told him everything. The hotel trips, the glances, the whispers, the silence. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He just nodded. Because deep down, I think he had known too. Maybe not the whole story, but enough of it. "They're not hiding it anymore," I said, voice shaking, not even trying. "You don't deserve that," he said. "You never did." And for the first time in months, I cried in front of someone. Not silent tears, but the ugly, heavy kind. The kind that leaves you breathless. And Patrick just sat there and held my hand like I used to do when he had nightmares as a little boy. "I'll help you," he said, with a kind of certainty I didn't know I needed. "Whatever you need, we'll get through this." And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had my son, I had my voice, and I had the truth. And that, right there, was the beginning of my strength. The thing about finding your strength after years of being silent is that it doesn't come in a roar. It comes quietly, like morning light creeping through the blinds. I didn't suddenly become a new woman overnight, but something in me had shifted, and I knew there was no going back. After talking with Patrick, I drove home in silence. The road curved through hills, just turning yellow with the first breath of autumn. I passed barns with peeling paint, rows of mailboxes leaning like tired soldiers, and yards scattered with plastic pumpkins. Everything looked normal. But inside me, something sacred had broken, and something strong had started to grow. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wedding picture on the dresser. Me, in white lace, beaming like I'd just found heaven on earth. Frank, young and proud, holding my hand like it was the only thing that mattered. And Marilyn, standing right behind us, in a powder blue bridesmaid dress, her face frozen in a smile I used to believe. I picked up the photo frame. The glass was cool in my hand. My fingers trembled. "Who are you now, Margaret?" I asked my reflection. "Who do you want to be?" That was the first night I didn't sleep in our bed. I made up the guest room. Not Marilyn's, the one, upstairs with the pale green curtains and the view of the garden. It had always been a quiet room, almost forgotten. But that night, it became mine. My space. My breath of fresh air. Frank noticed. "Why aren't you sleeping in our room?" he asked the next morning, sipping his coffee without looking at me. "I just needed space," I said calmly. He didn't argue. He didn't follow. He just nodded and walked away. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. He was too used to me folding. But not this time. Marilyn, on the other hand, wasn't so subtle. Later that week, she cornered me in the laundry room, her voice sharp and low. "Are you mad at me, Margie?" I turned slowly, holding a basket of towels between us like a shield. "Why, would I be mad?" I said, my voice calm, but firm. She shifted, uncomfortable. "You've been distant." I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "You've been distant too," I said. "For about 10 years. Her face froze, just for a second. A twitch in her mouth, a flicker in her eyes. Then she smiled. That same sickly sweet smile she always used when she thought she had the upper hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly. And I nodded. "I know you don't," I said. "But you will." And I walked out, letting the basket fall onto the floor. That night I called Patrick again. "I need a plan," I told him. We talked for hours. We spoke in codes, careful not to say too much in case Frank or Marilyn overheard. He helped me get a second phone, one they didn't know about. And we started looking at my finances. I hadn't realized how much I had sacrificed over the years. My name wasn't on the house deed. The retirement accounts were in Frank's name. Even the car was listed under his. "You've given him everything," Patrick said gently. "But we'll fix this, one piece at a time." It was like pulling weeds from a garden you thought was full of flowers. Every time we looked deeper, another root of dependency came up. But I kept going. I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of smiling through pain. tired of being the quiet one. I started going out more, walking in the mornings, volunteering at the church pantry, meeting with a lawyer in secret, in the back room of the library. Her name was Carol Whitman, a sharp, kind woman in her 50s, who listened to every word like it was sacred. "You've got rights, Mrs. Collins," she told me. "We can build a case. But I need honesty." And I gave it to her. Every detail. Every lie. Every moment I'd swallowed to keep peace in a house built on betrayal. By then, I had moved fully into the guest room. Frank stopped asking questions. Marilyn stopped pretending. The house was cold, not in temperature, but in spirit, like a funeral waiting to happen. But I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing, and something strange began to happen. I started smiling again. Not fake smiles, but small ones, the kind that sneak in when you remember who you are. I listened to music while folding laundry. I painted my nails red for the first time in years. I bought a new dress, not to please anyone else, but because I liked how it made me feel. Marilyn noticed. "You look different," she said one morning. "I feel different," I answered. And it was true. For the first time in a long, long while, I was becoming myself again. Sometimes healing doesn't come like a miracle. It comes like a slow tide, washing away pieces of who you used to be and making space for who you're becoming. That's how it felt. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was changing, and they could feel it. Frank started acting different. He wasn't affectionate, not that he had been for a long time, but now he was cold, even distant. He barely looked at me when we passed in the hallway. The man I had once danced with barefoot in the kitchen now couldn't meet my eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe both. Either way, I could see him unraveling, thread by thread. Marilyn, though, she grew sharper, like a dog that senses its grip slipping. She became clingier with Frank, offering to drive him places, calling out, "Need anything, honey?" across the house in that sugar-sweet voice that now made my stomach turn. She baked more, cleaned more, even tried wearing my old perfume. She was marking her territory. But what she didn't know was, I was done fighting for a man who didn't want to be fought for. I wasn't angry in the way she expected. I wasn't throwing things or yelling. I wasn't begging anyone to love me. That scared her more than any slap could have. One afternoon, I sat in the garden behind the house with a cup of mint tea and my journal. The hydrangeas were starting to brown at the edges, that time of year when everything begins to let go. It was quiet, just the wind and a pair of cardinals chirping in the crepe myrtle tree. I hadn't written poetry in decades, but that day, the words just came. She bloomed in silence, not because the world was watching, but because she remembered what sunlight felt like. I tore the page out and folded it into my pocket. The next day, I did something bold. I visited the local community center and signed up for a watercolor class. Just one, just to try. I hadn't painted since high school. I used to love it back, before the kids, before the laundry and bills and grocery runs stole my time and energy. When I sat down in front of that blank canvas, I felt 16 again. Nervous, hopeful, alive. The instructor, a kind woman named Diane, touched my shoulder gently after class and said, "You have a quiet strength, Margaret. I hope you come back." And I did, every week. I started filling the guest room with my little paintings, sunsets, quiet roads, a window with light pouring through it. None of them perfect, but all of them mine. At home, Frank started asking questions. "Where've you been?" he asked one evening, not with anger, but confusion. "Painting class," I said. setting down a jar of homemade jam I picked up at the farmer's market. He blinked. "You paint?" "I do now," I said. "Among other things." He didn't know what to say to that. He looked at me like I'd grown new skin. It was the first time in years he'd looked at me like I was a person and not just a piece of the furniture. Meanwhile, Patrick helped me set up a private savings account. I started setting money aside from my small pension and sewing work I'd picked up from neighbors. Little by little, I was building a way out. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a chilly October night. I'd just come home from painting class, my fingers still stained with blues and greens. I walked into the kitchen and found Marilyn leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "Are you having a midlife crisis?" she asked, sarcasm dripping from every word. I set my purse down, calmly. "No. I'm just remembering who I was before. I gave my life away." She rolled her eyes. "You always were dramatic." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I was loyal. I was quiet. I was loving. But dramatic? That's your specialty." She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised my hand. "I know, Marilyn. About you and Frank. I've known for a while now." Her face didn't go pale. She didn't gasp or faint. She just froze, like a statue mid-breath. "You don't know anything," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "I know enough," I replied. "And more importantly, I know who I am now. And I'm not the woman who's going to sit here and pretend this didn't happen." She stood still, as if waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I just turned around and walked up to my room. That was the real blow. Not anger, not confrontation. Just truth. Calm and sharp like glass. Later that night, Frank knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't open it. "Not tonight," I said. "Maybe not ever. You'll know when. I'm ready." And I meant it. There's something liberating about finally speaking the truth, even if it's only whispered through a closed door. The air felt lighter after that night. Not because things were fixed. Nothing about betrayal can be fixed. But because I had finally claimed the one thing they couldn't take from me, my voice. I didn't speak to either of them for 3 days. Not out of pettiness, but out of peace. I spent that time tending to the garden, raking leaves, and painting in long, quiet stretches. I cooked only for myself. Ate in the sunroom while listening to old records. Billie Holiday, Patsy Cline, Nina, Simone. Voices full of sorrow and grit. Women who knew about pain and survival. On the 4th morning, I found a note slipped under my bedroom door. It was written in Frank's clumsy cursive, the same handwriting that used to fill birthday, cards and grocery lists. The paper smelled faintly like his cologne. "Margaret, I know I've failed you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to talk to me. But I needed to say this. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped being worthy of it. Frank." I stared at the letter for a long time. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. But because I'd cried enough. There was no more water left in that well. Only quiet and clarity. That night, I finally agreed to meet with Carol, the lawyer, in person again. Patrick came with me. We sat in her office, a warm little room with stacks of books and photos of her kids on the shelves, and we laid everything out, the history, the timeline, the documents, the betrayal. Emotionally, Carol said, "You have more than enough to justify separation. And depending on how we move forward, you may be entitled to part of the retirement funds and the property. But the house isn't in her name," Patrick reminded her. Carol nodded. "That makes things trickier, but not impossible. Especially if she can prove long-term contribution to the household and that her financial dependence was intentionally cultivated by her husband. "She's given him everything for over 50 years, Patrick said, his voice firm. "She deserves better." And for once, I let myself believe it. Maybe I did. But even with all the planning, I still wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not until I had something more than just a legal case. I needed a full sense of closure. So I did something that surprised even me. I invited Marilyn to meet me for coffee. She hesitated when I asked. I could see it in her face: fear, confusion, maybe even guilt. But eventually, she said yes. We met at a little place just off the highway. Not fancy. A quiet diner where the booth smelled like syrup and the coffee was always hot but never quite good. We sat across from each other, two old women who used to share a womb, now sharing a silence that felt like a funeral. "You look tired," I said, sipping slowly. "So do you," she answered. I smiled, but not kindly. "Difference is, I've earned it." She didn't argue. For a while, we just sat. The waitress came and refilled our cups. The sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain felt louder than it should have. "Why him?" I asked finally. My voice didn't shake. "I don't know," she said, eyes fixed on the table. "It started a long time ago. After Tom died. I was broken. And he was there. You were so busy being strong, I guess. I don't know. I didn't mean for it to happen. You meant for it to keep happening," I said. "For 10 years. She nodded. A small, bitter nod. "Yes. I trusted you," I whispered. "You were my other half. My sister." "I know," she said. "And I'll hate myself for the rest of my life." I set my cup down gently. "That's between you and God, Marilyn. But don't think for a second I'm carrying that hate with you. I've carried enough." She looked at me then. Really looked at me. Her eyes weren't full of malice or defensiveness. They were just tired, empty. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "Good," I said, standing slowly, "because I haven't. But I am done letting you take up space in my heart." I paid for both our coffees, left a tip, and walked out into the cool October air. I didn't look back, and in that moment, I felt it. Freedom. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones when you finally put down a weight you've been carrying too long. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need her to grovel. I just needed to stop needing anything from her. The strange thing about letting go is that it's not just about leaving someone. It's about finally coming home to yourself. After that conversation with Marilyn, something shifted inside me for good. I no longer needed her confession. I no longer wanted Frank's apology. What I wanted was space. Real, living, breathing space. The next few weeks passed quietly, but not uneventfully. I moved more of my things into the guest room and started making it feel like a real home. Bought a small bookshelf and filled it with the novels I used to love before my life became all about doctor appointments, recipes, and family obligations. I hung one of my paintings on the wall, a golden field under a sunset, and even bought new bedding. Yellow and white. Clean. Simple. Bright. I started calling it my room out loud. And the first time I said that in front of Frank, he flinched. One afternoon, he stopped me in the hallway. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To painting class," I said, grabbing my canvas bag. He looked confused, almost helpless. "We were supposed to have dinner tonight, remember?" I didn't. "Stop walking. You're welcome to eat. I won't be there." He didn't follow me. Just stood in the hallway, mouth open, hands in his pockets. The same man who once led me through life with confidence now didn't know how to walk beside me, and I realized I had outgrown him tight. Painting class. Diane pulled me aside and said she wanted to feature one of my works in a small gallery show at the community center. "Are you serious?" I asked, shocked. "Of course," she said. "There's something honest in the way you use color. It's quiet, but it speaks. No one had said anything like that to me in years, and I let myself believe it. Back at home, I began spending more time outside. The leaves had turned to fire, red and orange and gold like something holy. I raked them into piles with purpose, let the cool wind kiss my cheeks. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with a blanket and just listen, to birds, to wind chimes, to my own breath. And slowly, people in the community started noticing me again. Not as Frank's wife, not as Marilyn's sister, just Margaret. I volunteered more often at the food pantry. I joined a senior walking group. I reconnected with Edith, a friend I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. We met for breakfast one Tuesday at a diner near the interstate. She wore the same red lipstick she always had and ordered sweet tea at 8 a.m. like it was nothing. "I heard something," she said, as we split a blueberry muffin. "Let me guess," I replied, half smiling. "About Frank?" She nodded. "And your sister." "People always talk," I said, sipping my coffee. "But I'm doing all right." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're doing more than all right. You look alive." I didn't even realize. I'd started crying until I felt the tears hit my wrist. Not sadness, relief, gratitude. Like someone had finally seen me. A few days later, Patrick came over with a manila folder. Inside was a preliminary separation agreement. Simple, clear, fair. Nothing vindictive, just boundaries. I read it in silence, then looked up at him. "Do I sign this now?" "You sign it when you're ready, Mama," he said gently. "Not before." I nodded. I wasn't scared anymore. I just needed to be sure it wasn't coming from pain, but from peace. That evening, I sat at the kitchen, table with the agreement in front of me. Frank walked in, set his keys on the counter, and glanced at the papers. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He just walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from me. After a long silence, he finally said, "I ruined everything." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "I miss the sound of your laughter," he added, voice cracking. "It used to be the best part of my day." "I miss it too," I said, without looking up. "But I don't miss who I had to become to keep it going." He swallowed hard. "Is there anything left of us?" I folded the papers slowly, slid them back into the folder. "There's something left of me," I said. "And for now, that's enough." He nodded. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't beg. That silence, it was finally honest. And that night, as I lay in my own bed, in my own room, under clean sheets I picked out just for myself, I stared at the ceiling and felt it. Not sadness, not loss, but strength. A strength I didn't know I had. It's funny how a woman can begin again at 75. How she can rediscover not just who she was before the years slipped by, but someone entirely new. I wasn't chasing the past anymore. I wasn't mourning what I lost. I was learning to live in the present, moment by moment, with grace. The days grew colder. October bled into November, and the first frost arrived early that year in Asheville. I stood at the kitchen window. One morning, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and watched the grass glisten with silver. The house was silent. Marilyn had moved out the week before. She didn't say goodbye, just left a note and a half-empty drawer. "I'm sorry," she wrote. but I think it's time. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. Her leaving wasn't about weakness or shame. It was space. I finally had it, and I wasn't giving it back. I filled the emptiness with little joys. A stack of new books from the library, cinnamon candles burning in the living room, a playlist of old jazz records that played while I made soup from scratch. Every corner of the house began to feel like mine. Not ours, not his, not hers, just mine. One Sunday afternoon, I went to the gallery show at the community center. Diane met me at the door, beaming. "Your painting's right over here," she said, leading me to the far wall. There it was. Resilience. A small watercolor of a single tree growing through cracked pavement. Simple. Quiet. Honest. A little. Girl stopped in front of it and tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mama, this one looks strong." And I almost wept right there, because she was talking about more than a tree. Later, Diane handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Your first sale." She smiled. "Someone bought it." I stared at her, stunned. "You're joking." "No joke," she said. He said it reminded him of his mother. I held the envelope like it was sacred. It wasn't about the money, though it helped. It was the first time in decades that something I made, something that came purely from me, had been seen, valued. When I got home that night, I didn't say a word to Frank. He was sitting in the den, watching an old Western. I just walked past him and pinned the check to the corkboard in the laundry room, right next to the poem I'd written weeks ago. She bloomed in silence. That evening, I wrote another one. She stitched herself back together not with thread or forgiveness, but with the quiet hands of dignity and the steady breath of choosing herself. Patrick came by the next day to help with some paperwork. He saw the pinned check and smiled. "You sold a painting?" "I did," I said, beaming. He gave me a hug, then stepped back. "You really are starting over, huh?" "I'm not starting over," I said. "I'm just continuing, but finally in the right direction." That weekend, Sarah called and invited me to her Thanksgiving dinner. "Mama, you have to come this year. It'll be small. Just the kids, me and Ben, and a few close friends." "I'd love to," I said. She paused. "Will you bring Dad?" There it was, the big question. "I don't know yet," I said. "We're still figuring out how to exist around each other. But I'll be there. With pie." And when the day came, I arrived with 2 pies, apple and pecan, and a basket of homemade rolls. I wore a deep plum sweater, a silver brooch shaped like a dove, and red lipstick. For me, the grandkids ran into my arms the moment I stepped in. "Grandma," they shouted. "We saved you a seat." During dinner, I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. But not because I was someone's wife or sister or mother. Because I was me, whole, present, and at peace. That night, as I got ready for bed, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The woman staring back at me had soft wrinkles and silver-streaked hair. Her eyes were tired, but they held fire. Her mouth curved, not in sorrow, but in something close to triumph. "I know you," I whispered, "and I love you." Sometimes, healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself like a parade or blaze in like fireworks. It happens in moments so quiet, so ordinary, you almost miss them. A morning where you don't wake up heavy. A conversation that doesn't end in tears. A meal cooked just for pleasure. That's what healing looked like for me. And it was finally here. Frank and I had settled into something that resembled peace. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a mutual silence that no longer held pain, only space. We lived in the same house but in different orbits. I no longer tried to change him, and he no longer tried to pretend we hadn't fallen apart. We were civil, polite, careful. One evening, he knocked on the doorframe of the guest room, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "You always like this before bed," he said. I took the mug and nodded. "Thank you." He lingered for a moment, then asked softly, "Are you okay?" I looked up. "Yes, I am." It was the first time I said it out loud, and it was true. He sat down across from me on the old bench near the window. The moonlight poured in over his shoulders. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I just saw him clearly now, without the veil of devotion. "I think about the man I used to be," he said, voice brittle, "and I wonder when he disappeared." I sipped my tea and watched the steam rise. "I think we both lost ourselves, but I found my way back." He nodded slowly. "Do you think I could ever find mine?" I met his eyes, steady and sure. "That's not a question for me to answer." The next morning, I went through my closet and found an old wooden box tucked in the back, behind blankets and photo albums. Inside were letters, some from Frank, some from my mother, and a few I had written to myself during the hard years, but never sent. I opened one dated November 17th, 1987. My handwriting was sharp and rushed. "Dear Margaret, you're tired. I can see it in your reflection. But you're still here. You keep going. I don't know how, but you do. Don't forget that even if no one claps for you, you survived another day. That's enough." I folded the letter slowly, tears in my throat. That woman, that version of me, had been waiting for years to be seen. And I saw her now. That week, I started hosting small gatherings at the house. Just 3 or 4 women, some from church, others from painting class. We called it tea and telling. We'd sit around the sunroom, sipping peppermint or ginger, tea, and tell stories. Some funny, some sad, all true. One of the women, Joanne, lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago. She shared how she didn't know who she was without someone to cook for. Another, Linda, had been through a divorce in her 60s after her husband left her for a woman half his age. "I felt invisible for years," Linda said. "And now? I paint, I bake, I flirt at the grocery store, and I laugh. A lot." We all laughed with her. In those moments, I saw something sacred, not just in them, but in me. We weren't broken. We were seasoned. Soft around the edges, maybe, but strong where it counted. After one of our gatherings, I sat on the porch alone, watching dusk settle over the yard. The wind rustled the trees, and I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders. Frank stepped out onto the porch and stood quietly beside me. "Patrick told me about the separation papers," he said. "I figured he might," I replied. He nodded. "I haven't signed them yet." I turned toward him, my voice steady. "That's your choice, but mine's already made." He swallowed hard. "I understand." We stood there in silence, 2 people who had once built a life together and now stood on opposite shores of the same river. "I'm proud of you, Margaret," he whispered, and that was the last thing I needed from him. Not love. Not promises, just recognition. That night, I pulled out the separation agreement again. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and signed my name in full. Margaret Elaine Collins. It was done. And it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like air, like release, like a long, deep exhale after holding my breath for too many years. I walked outside, barefoot, and stood in the grass under a sky full of stars. The earth was cold, but steady beneath me, and for the first time since this whole storm began, I felt free. Some endings don't come with fireworks. They arrive like a soft sunset, quiet, glowing, and whole. That's how it felt when I signed those papers. Not like I was losing a marriage, but like I was stepping out of a shadow I didn't even realize I'd been living in. The following morning, I woke early. The world was still dark outside, that delicate hour between night and day when the world holds its breath. I made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a shawl, and sat by the window in silence. A light frost covered the grass. The trees stood bare, but not dead, just waiting for spring. That was me now. Not broken. Just between seasons. I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. You don't need to be whole to begin. You just need to start. Then I closed the book, picked up my keys, and took a drive. I ended up on a long, winding road that led to a park I hadn't visited in years. It was where Frank and I used to bring the kids when they were little, where Sarah learned to ride her bike and Patrick caught his first frog. I walked the trail slowly, my breath visible in the cold. Morning air, my footsteps steady on the gravel. When I reached the lake, I sat on a bench by the water, pulled my coat tight, and let the wind kiss my cheeks. The sky above was a soft blue, streaked with early light. The reflection on the water was still, like a mirror. And in it, I saw her. The woman I used to be. She wasn't weak. She wasn't naive. She was just tired from giving too much. And the woman I was now? She didn't hate her. She forgave her. She thanked her. I stayed on that bench a long time, just breathing, letting the quiet settle into me like an old friend. And then I pulled out the folded poem I'd written the night before and read it aloud, just for me. She was not what they expected. Not bitter, not broken, not burned. She was a slow flame, steady, silent, and finally, her own. That evening, I called Sarah and told her I'd be moving out after the holidays. I found a small place near the river trail, I said. 1 bedroom, lots of light, and a porch swing. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Mama, are you happy? I smiled. I'm becoming. When I told Patrick, he offered to help move me. He showed up 2 days later with boxes and bins and a toolbox that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Clinton administration. We laughed the whole afternoon. I can't believe you're actually doing this, he said, carrying a box labeled kitchen, Margaret only. I can, I replied. I just needed to believe I deserved to. The apartment was small, but warm. The bedroom had a view of the river. The kitchen smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I filled the walls with my own art, hung lace curtains in the windows, and placed my poems on a corkboard by the door. It wasn't just a home. It was mine. On the first night, I sat on the porch swing with a blanket over my legs and a glass of sweet tea in hand. Fireflies blinked in the distance, and a soft breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. I felt no fear, no regret, just peace. Frank sent a letter a few weeks later, handwritten, no return address. Margaret, I hope your new home brings you peace. I hope you wake up every morning knowing you're strong, and that I knew it too, even when I didn't show it. I was foolish. I was weak. But you are the bravest person I've ever known. Thank you for sharing your life with me, even when I didn't deserve it. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of a drawer, not to reread, not to revisit, just to know it was there. A final chapter. Closed. These days, I walk every morning by the river. I host tea and telling in my little apartment once a month. I keep painting. Skies, trees, the curve of the hills in late afternoon. I even started teaching a beginner watercolor class for women over 60. We call ourselves the late bloomers, And we are blooming, let me tell you. Sometimes people ask me, "Aren't you lonely living alone after all those years?" And I say, "Not at all. I spent too long lonely in a full house. Now I'm alone, but I'm alive." If you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late, if you've been betrayed, if you've been forgotten, if you've stayed quiet for too long, let me tell you something. From one woman to another, it's never too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone to begin again. You don't need anyone's permission to choose yourself. You just need one moment of courage, one breath of truth. And when you take it, you'll find a whole life waiting for you on the other side. Just like I did. Thank you for listening.